Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everybody listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we have a very special guest who I'm going to introduce, and we're going to talk about a broad range of topics, inshallah. Starting with what current situation is and going right through to the state of the situation over in Palestine and how we can help with that, and what the current efforts are around there. So to introduce first our guest, we have Dr. Ismail Patel, who is the chairman of a very special group of Friends of Al-Aqsa who do a lot of work in that area. And also he has a PhD recently in Islamophobia. So it'd be really good to get, inshallah, his views and his topics in some of the issues which are going on at the moment. Our usual co-host as well, mashallah, is Maulana Sajid, who we know is the head of the Paradise Academy Madrasa, local madrasa, and the Imam of Masjid al-Umar, and spearhead of these activities which are currently going on with the local community and try to keep us engaged and try to keep us all upbeat in this time. So without further ado, I want to kind of get into some of these topics which we've been going on in our local community, and I want to talk first about the situation around COVID-19 and the situation that it's put us into now, so about the limiting social contact and that sort, and how we think the world will look after that. So Dr. Saab, I'd like to pose that to you. So what are some of the changes you think more long term or medium term that are going to be a side effect of COVID-19 and some of these restrictions that have been placed upon us?
Assalamu alaikum first, Brother Babar, and assalamu alaikum Maulana as well. Jazakallah khair for inviting me. And assalamu alaikum to all the listeners as well. It's wonderful. Hopefully, let's try and share some views together and see if we can educate each other really in the next hour. Yeah, Jazakallah for the question. Very, very important, of course, very contemporary as well. And it's in the forefront of most people's minds. I want to look at much more sort of global aspect of COVID-19. And I want to look at two aspects in particular. First is look at how global society is ruled, or how people think that it should be ruled. And regarding that, there are three issues. There's a group of people who are called globalists, who think that the world should have centralized organizations like the United Nations, like the IMF, the World Bank, through a central system. The whole globe should be equal and should be run. That's the first group of people. Then there's a second group of people, the internationalists, who are more regional. So like the European Union, the African Union, the MENA countries, Middle and North African countries, the non-aligned countries. So we have these subgroups, and they are the internationalists. After that, we have the nationalists, who believe in nationhood states, and they believe that individually, as every nation should have individual rights, and they should be able to do whatever they like as an individual nation. So these are the three paradigms in the global scale of how the world order should run. I want you to keep this in mind. And what COVID-19 has done is, first and foremost, it has made us realize that it respects no borders. It respects no nations, it respects no states, it respects no color, it respects no creed. It affects everybody. So it is therefore a global impact. And that is very important, because now how to tackle COVID-19 also means that we need a global institute. If you think about it, it doesn't matter how much a nation does at its individual level. We'll never be able to be protected from COVID if we leave another enclave around the world that we cannot make sure that we have eradicated COVID-19. Therefore, there's a globalist vision emerging. However, and this is the tension within the whole system, is that the global institutes that exist today, almost all of them have failed. If you look at the United Nations, what it's been able to do on the global scale, it has failed. If we look at the World Health Organization, it has become a political football tool for different countries to use it and abuse it. And that has failed dramatically as well. All the international globalist institution has failed. Similarly, all the internationalist institutes, the European Union has failed. It hasn't been able to help people in Spain, people in Italy, people in Greece. Different regions within the EU have been impacted differently. Similarly in Africa, similarly in Asia, Middle East, South America, same scenario. What has happened at the national level, every nation has become extremely powerful through COVID-19, despite the fact that COVID-19 respects no border. And this is a great tension within the system. Now, every country has its own rules and regulations. When they had the lockdown, when they ended the lockdown, what type of lockdown they had, and what will happen post the lockdown. Nationalism in that sense has really come up. Internationalism has suffered, globalism has also suffered. Yet the disease itself tells us that if you do not respect globalism, then nationalism itself will not survive. How this fans out is something nobody can predict at the moment, but it is something we need to look at very carefully. My suggestion would be to individuals, and particularly Muslims, that we need to teach ourselves, go back to our teachings of Islam, that we have to respect every human being, irrespective of their color, creed, irrespective of their nationality, wherever they're living. So we're more globalist. And this is something that we need to try and inculcate, because this is extremely important on the next three factors that COVID-19 has brought about. It has brought about at least 3 or 4 things. First, it has shown us that at the moment we depend on a global economical system where we have produce, say in Africa, tea or coffee, maize, we expect it in Europe. Or cheap merchandise produced in China, we expect it in Europe straight away. As when we demand it, we just produce the money and it comes to us. What this has shown us that this security that we had assumed for guarantee is no longer going to be there. That means the global food chain will have to become more localized, will require both a much nearer center from where we can access that produces than we have been dependent upon. That frees up a lot of system in which the global West in particularly has been able to dictate how the world order rules. Means the producers of food in particular will have a different sense of authority over their produce, and they'll be able to dictate their price much more better than they have been able to do at the moment. But that also means the West in particular, we might have to be in what they call food insecurity. Similarly with produce itself, at the moment we have cheap merchandise because it can be produced in either Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, or clothes we wear, or electronic goods in China or Korea. Those line of production will have to be brought much nearer, because what this has shown, COVID-19 has shown, is we can no longer be dependent on something that is being produced something very far away. So there's a massive global change in the world order that's going to emerge. Obviously, if everything goes back to normal within the next few weeks, then I think the world will go back to how it was. But if there is a comeback of COVID-19, or if there is a prolonged session, that if people carry on mingling, then the infection comes back, then systems will change. Of course, this depends on a lot of stuff. But what it has brought forward is 2 different other factors. That the world has been, there's great inequality within the world order. And then equality is just not exposed people who have suffered COVID, people who are poor, but what it has shown that the rich people themselves cannot isolate themselves from the rest of the world through their wealth alone. And that is something very important that has emerged. And I think a lot of actions and events that we are seeing around the globe at the moment are partly to do with that. Obviously, we can't say for 100% that those, particularly I'm thinking of the Black Lives Matter, would have not happened if it wasn't for COVID-19. But what I can say, that COVID-19 has brought it much more forward to the forefront. And that is something we need to think about. So there's this global impact of globalization, internationalization, and nationalism that is playing a three-way dimensional tension. That is then creating a problem with food chain, food insecurity, production of goods. And the other thing that also will happen is human movement. If we think about how many people who are citizens of one country and work in another country are phenomenal. I mean, I don't know the exact percentage, but it is a very, very high percentage that the world had become very dynamic. If we go to Middle East, if we go to Africa, we will see people from right across the world. How is this movement of people going to take place? If we go to London, I mean, we see that there's an estimate of something like 40% of the people are from abroad. So this movement of people will also be restricted if COVID-19 carries on. So this kind of changes will bring about major dynamical economic, social, and cultural change within every country. That will have impact on how a country itself rules, how it has relationship with the rest of the globe, and this divide between the rich and the poor, how that will transpire within the next few years will be something very, very interesting. One very important thing.
Sorry to disturb you. Do you think
Sure.
the divide will go bigger or will it get closer?
I think there's going to be new players emerging and new losers and winners. If you think about what's happening, Maulana, everything has gone digital. I mean, think about if it was just 6 months ago, most probably you would have invited me to your masjid to give a talk. Now, you know, it's natural to just do Zoom conferences and meetings. Everything is going digital. Digital has become such a powerful tool. What will happen to the digital companies? Think about it. Will they become the masters? Are they the next? They are the biggest world powerful institutes that will dictate how we will be ruled? Or will they become public bodies? Will the governments of the world will say, that, look, everybody has to use this, like water is nationalized in Britain, everybody has to use it, therefore we have to have it nationalized. It has to be a public body. Does a digital outlook company become a public body or not? Those kind of changes, Maulana, will take a long way for us to find out. So what will happen is that there will be a change of dynamics. There will always be winners and losers. I don't think because of COVID-19, the world will become all equal and everything will become hunky-dory, or the changes will become that the disparity will become bigger. It's just that new players will emerge and the old players who are more powerful will have to go back. As to how that takes place is a danger zone. And I mean a danger zone in particularly how the people who have the vested interest at the moment will be able to let go of that power. And we could have a lot of catastrophe and chaos. And one of the examples I can give you in digital world itself, to give you an example, is for the first time in the world national history, as a nation state, that China is now digitalizing its currency. There's no country in the world where the currency is digital, where people get paid wages by digital. They'll get an email to say, this is how much money you've got. And they'll be able to digitally use that. And it will be underwritten by the Chinese Reserve Bank. Yeah, so unlike the cryptocurrencies that we have at the moment that are being produced individually, we will have now a nation state like China, a major player. What will happen to the American dollar, where something like, I think, 40% of the world currency exchange at the moment takes place in dollar? If we have a digital currency that comes into the digital world, that means we'll have a new player in the arena, which will be much more powerful. And if people move towards that, we'll have a change of direction of power as well. So we will have inequality re-emerging, but with new players. And who takes part in this and which players emerge, it's unknown at the moment. But that's why we as individuals who are hopefully listening to this, who are thinkers, workers, need to become at the forefront of this crisis that we're facing. Because only in crisis that people who think, invest, will be able to come out better than they're in at the moment. And I think that's something we all need to be invested in, and invest in our young people in particular, the young intellectuals, entrepreneurials, so that they come out with ideas and concepts, so that they are the forerunners, and we create a much more better world than what it is at the moment. Yeah, we are living in a very unequal world, and we need to bring that about. Of course, this is the back of this is the whole idea of recession. If you think about what our government talks about, is the fact that we're heading towards, I think the GDP is down by 20%, highest ever in the history of Britain, reduction of gross domestic product. That means we're going to have a massive recession hitting us in the next few months. How the government handles that, and how that then brings back to our three issues that we mentioned earlier. That will depend directly on whether we have the idea of globalism emerging, or internationalism, or nationalism. If nationalism emerges as the strongest player, then I think what we will have is then the ethnic minorities, people of color, people of different religion, then will become much more oppressed. Because when you have a recession, the first people who are targeted are the people who are the minorities in any country. Sorry.
Mashallah, Dr. Saab, there was so many different topics which you touched on there. So if you don't mind, just bring, because we talked about some social topics, economic topics. We went from global, we came back to the local. We also talked on some of the societal issues on Black Lives Matter. So, and I think each one of them we need to explore. So I was gonna bring this back to COVID and where we are with COVID and how we can impact that. So at the moment, there seems to be this reliance, and so when we look at the government and we look at within the United Kingdom, I would especially leave it to England rather than United Kingdom, because each one of the countries within the UK are treating it slightly different. There's a big reliance on the science, right? So the science says this and the science says that, and they come out with these infograms and these diagrams and these messages around this is how we should treat it. What are some of the things in Islam that we can do? So I suppose the fundamental question is, as it's a brand new disease, do we totally rely on the science? And is the science what we go with? And is there anything we can take from Islam, from where the Prophet ﷺ gave us some guidance on this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave some guidance, or has science taken over and do we just go with the science on this?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, I think you touched something on something very fundamental, actually. Obviously, answering your question directly, we have had advice on how to treat a pandemic. Pandemic was suffered during the time of the Sahabas. The plague of Amwas is obviously very well known in our Islamic history. And the fact of isolation, making sure you do not enter zones of plagues, this advice was given by the Prophet ﷺ. So we have that history with us. So that's the direct thing. But I think what you're also trying to touch, something much more fundamental, is the idea that because somehow the secularist and the liberalist ideology, that because everybody's suffering, there must be a cruel God, and therefore science somehow is much more superior than faith. And I think that I have had some young people ask me those questions, and I think they're very, very important. Now this is something very important for us as Muslims and people of faith. And I think I would also say even for secularists, it's very important how we try and understand human beings, how we understand nature itself. Let's take an example of what science means to us today, generally, how people perceive science. And I don't mean science to go into GCSE biology, history, or chemistry. I'm not talking about doing a science degree at university. I'm talking about how the concept of science, how we think of it. We think of science as a value system that has provided us with all the luxuries that we have in the world. It is a means by which humanity is being protected. It is a means of intelligence. People who are scientific are supposed to be more clever. You have to be part of science to be civilized. It is that essence, the idea of science, civilization, enlightenment is what I want to talk about. If we think about this very carefully, then think about the plague. What we have in COVID-19 is a plague. Now, plagues have been in part of human history since humanity has started recording history. Plague have been in the Roman Empire. Before that, the Greeks have written about it. The Persians have written about it. Throughout South American history have written about it. The African history has written about it. That plagues has been part of human nature. And if you think about plagues returning, means that science, this civilization, this idea that science has brought us such a high level that we have advanced from anything primitive, anything barbaric, anything that was from the Dark Ages. Science becomes bankrupt. Because how come we're suffering from an epidemic now, a pandemic, that people suffered 10,000 years ago or 1,000 years ago in the Dark Ages, if science was so good? Science has failed us. But sorry, carry on.
That's why I think the challenge for all the masajid and the ulama was, when we were closing the doors, was where's our reliance on Allah gone? Do you understand? And So even now, people question that we're so into science that we've forgotten our deen. And yes, alhamdulillah, our Prophet and sometimes you have to go through a pandemic to understand the Messiah. And now we're understanding how Nabi Sallallahu taught us when such a pandemic or plague does come about, how you need to resist it and not go to a place where there is a plague.
Sure.
And these messiahs come alive, and we learn about them. And that's the beauty of our deen, that it doesn't put your life at risk. It tells you to safeguard your life and safeguard life of other people as well. So the thing is, like you said, the reliance on science. Do we just rely on science? um, because reality, science in itself really proves the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more you explore science, the more it points towards the being of one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though the scientists might deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But reality is that scientists prove that there is a God, there is a being. And but like I said to you today, I think that's what youngsters are asking. Are we relying too much on science, and are we going away from?
No, sure. Let's take that a bit further, Mawlana. Jazakallah for that. Let's think about it. We call ourselves civilized. That every generation is more clever than the past generation. That's what civilization is all about. That we're becoming more civilized as we're getting further away in time. Yeah, that's a general idea, that we are more civilized than our parents, and we are definitely more civilized than people 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. But look at the advice. What is the science advising us today? This great knowledge base, this great emancipator, this great enlightenment value. Isolation. Who told us about isolation? We learned that nearly 1,400 years ago. Who told about even that of purity of cleanliness? Yeah, even it's in the Bible. Even Isa alayhi salam, when he met the lepers, they were isolated. Yeah, so that was even longer, 2,000 years ago. So what has science advanced us? Science does not advance knowledge. It is a different way of thinking. That's what we need to understand. What science does is science, of course, is fantastic. It brings about technology. The fact that we're here talking to each other is through technology. But that should not be mixed up. This is where people slip their thinking. The technology that it's providing, it's not making humanity much more humane. We're not becoming much more cleverer in that sense of thinking, of how we are created. That is a different field, and we can't mix the two together. When we mix the two together, that's what science ideology is trying to teach us. The myth of science is trying to bring about. And that is where we lose out. That's where people start thinking that either you believe in science or you believe in faith. The fact is, science is one way of thinking, and faith is another way of thinking of how world is being created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we always rely on that somebody is more superior than ourselves. And COVID-19 has exposed that we believed that we were so great. We could travel the world within minutes. We can talk to people across the globe within minutes. Yet we have a nano micro minutest particle, a billionth time of our body size, We cannot even see it with a naked eye. We cannot even see it with a microscope. We need an electron microscope to see it. Yet it has totally paralyzed the globe. Where is the power of humanity? Nowhere to be seen. This is where people with faith will say, Subhanallah. This is where the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
is. Right, during this isolation period, I think that's where people have managed to think and ponder, and it's given them that moment to pause from their busy life and their schedule. That what is my purpose here? Is it just to wait for the pandemic and die, or is there more? And alhamdulillah, I think because of that, this is an opportunity for ourselves to reach out to people, the vulnerable, or the people that of no faith, or of other faith. That look, alhamdulillah, Islam is that religion that our Quran, our Sunnah has brought us the answers, has brought us salvation for this dunya and in the akhirat. And this is an opportunity where, while people are pondering their purpose of creation, while people are sat at home and thinking what's going to happen next, this is an opportunity really to give dawah to people that everything is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like you just mentioned, the whole world is crippled by a small virus, and that's the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah can do
Absolutely.
anything.
Absolutely.
I think,
Sorry,
Dr.
brother.
No. So I just want to say, I just want to kind of reiterate what you were saying there. Like there's almost like there's two separate fields, and where science excels in finding new technologies and developing them in that worldly fashion. It has its place, and it's magnificent in its own right there. But we have this realm of spirituality and Islam and faith where science has no real interaction, because it's not, it doesn't have any grounding there. But one thing I wanted to kind of move the topic on from COVID onto some a really something that's really going on and pungent in the current world, if we could. So the Black Lives Matter movement and how it's affecting us now. So there's almost like two camps here, and I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate and try to get so there's one camp which is, yes, this is abhorrent what's happening. There is discrimination going on, and we need to stand behind our black brothers and sisters, and we need to champion that cause. And the other one is, well, why only them? You know, the other side to it is like all lives matter, and there's an argument there to say, well, actually, there's more than there's, or maybe they're playing up on something, and maybe it's not as bigger issue. So where do we stand with our Islamic views on this whole racism and prejudice, and is there a problem? And if there is a problem, how do we deal with it?
As far as we are concerned, from an Islamic perspective, as Maulana is here, he'll be able to give a better answer. But my understanding is that we human beings are created all equal. And our superiority or inferiority is only on level of our piety. That is only dictated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we cannot judge each other. So irrespective of our faith or not faith, we are all equal. So all human beings must be treated as equal beings. So that's the first thing. Having stated that, I think you got several questions that, Brother Babar, you asked. How do we see the Black Lives Matter? Is it only Black Lives Matter or all lives matter, as you put it? And it's very important to understand that at any one time and space, in particular time and place, there are a certain group of people who will have gone through a certain history. It means that that history needs readdressing. In particularly, if you look at the American Africans, they have gone through a tremendous history where they were enslaved, taken from Africa. And remember, nearly 30% of them were Muslims. Most people forget that when African slaves were taken, 30%, 4 million, of the 12 million, 4 million were Muslims. It's phenomenal. 4 million Muslims were taken across. And not only were they stripped of their rights, as in physical rights, but they were stripped of their culture. Yeah. What used to happen is they used to, from any one village, they used to bring the slaves, they used to separate them in different parts of America, so they'd make sure that they didn't even share the same language, so they could not communicate with each other. And that's how they ended up losing their faith, because there were so few of them, and they could not propagate their faith anymore to the next generation. And very few survived. Some did survive, but very few. Obviously, some documents remain. So the suffering is for something like 300 years. It's not something new. Yeah. So we're talking about 300 years of oppression. The injustice of taking them from Africa, stripping them of their human rights, their culture, their heritage, their faith, then subjugating them to work for the white man, not being paid. Chattel slavery is different from any other kind of slavery. You do not get paid. You are 100% owner. You're owned by a master. The master does whatever he likes to you. He can literally kill you and nothing will happen to him. There's no law that will protect you. Only your master is your lawgiver and provider of your life, literally. Yeah, that happened for hundreds of years. Then slavery ended, but it only ended in legislature. It didn't end in spirit and practice. Then they went through lynching. Then there was the Jim Crow laws. Then they have the civil rights movement where they say, you know what, now everybody's equal, you can vote, you can have a jobs. But even today in America, something like the highest unemployment rate is amongst the African Americans. I think the prisons is something like 60% of all the prisoners in America are African descent. It could be even higher. I think I would say at least minimum 60% are African Americans. people who are shot by police today and since past decades has always been African Americans. So the oppression has been phenomenal. So you have a time and space, as I started saying, that needs redressing. You can't talk about all lives matter when such great oppression has been taken place on these people, and then say, you know what, when they're asking for justice, they've suffered so long, so they burn one building, and all of a sudden we have more sympathy for concrete and bricks than we've had the suffering for human beings for the past 300 years. This is the psychology that is played by the oppressor upon us. Of course, it's wrong to burn a building. I don't advocate that, but we need to put it in the position and the place where it's being done and why it's being done. Because for 300 years, they've begged and they've groveled and they've requested for justice, and they have never got it. If they haven't got it all these years, you have no right now, after 300 years of oppression, saying, you know what, don't do that, I'll give it to you. But we haven't. We haven't given them their rights.
I think this disease still exists where, like you mentioned before, I think if you're a minority or ethnic, the opportunities are limited or the investment is not made upon those people. Because there's no investment on those people, they don't have opportunities. And then unfortunately, they resort to drugs, they resort to violence. And then it's always portrayed through the movies or everywhere. These are people, black people only do the drugs or whatever. And that perception is made to the people. And it's unfortunate because that's how then everybody pursues the black people. And whereas, like you said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given everybody the ability and the intelligence to succeed. But unfortunately, what happens is whether it's governments, they control the people, make sure that they don't reach to their potentials or whatever reasons. It's unfortunate. Like you said, in Islam, alhamdulillah, our Prophet these illnesses existed before Islam. Amongst the Arabs, amongst themselves, the tribes would fight amongst one another. Forget the Kullus and the people that were like slaves. Amongst their own tribes, they would fight one another, ready to kill one another. So, Prophet got a real change amongst the people of equality and of opportunity. A community without targeting one another to raise Hazrat Bilal radiallahu anhu to the maqam of a muazzin, to eradicate from the people mind that that people can't go further. And I think this is why unfortunately we still see sometimes we see, and we talked about it last week, sometimes when our Asian people go for jobs or interviews, they don't get the opportunity. We see in the football now, they're always talking about it where black people or Asian people don't get the opportunity to become managers or players simply because of their skin color and not because of their ability. And it's quite unfortunate. And on the other hand, I still think sometimes in this country we have the opportunity. And then if you look at our Asian subcontinent people in Arabia, when they go out to work, they have no rights and no, they don't even have a status. They can't own anything. They're just, it's like they're owned by somebody. And unfortunately, they can't even call their families over. So that's something you think, at least here in England, we have these opportunities. We can reach, and there are these campaigns that do take place where equal opportunities exist.
I want to pick up on the topic which you mentioned there, and I think it's a really important topic that we address it because you mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, how he elevated the beloved Bilal radiallahu anhu to the status of muazzin, and how once he was given that right, his rank in Islam, and how we all find the stories of Bilal radiallahu anhu so painful, but then we see the light at the end of it. So in the time when the Prophet ﷺ was in Arabia, slavery was widespread. Yeah. And how was that addressed? Because we can't talk about how the Americans, like, it was bad for them and how the whole slavery movement there was bad, and then there's a perception that there was that at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So how was that dealt with when the Prophet ﷺ was about, and how was slavery perceived in that time?
There's two things here. There's several things actually. something I'll just remind me if I forget. I want to talk about structuralism that Maulana, you talked about, that Muslims suffered different parts of the world. But I talk about the slavery first. When we talk about slavery, the American chattel slavery and the slavery that was practiced around the world in the 7th century is two different things altogether. What we talk about slavery in the 7th century, especially in the region of the Hijaz and even in the time of the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire, it was more of what we would now call butlers, or people who work within your house. So they were part of your family, but they could buy their freedom. They could be independent people. They could have their own trade and their own agency. This is what was denied with American African slavery or the European slavery. So there's two different systems. So we can't compare one or the other. I'm not saying the first one is good. I'm coming to that. That was terrible as well. And it was terrible enough for the Prophet ﷺ to make sure that despite it being so pervasive within the society, to gradually make sure that he abolished it and advised very, very strongly to the whole ummah that we should not advance slavery. So as far as Muslim jurisprudence is concerned, that slavery is not acceptable within Islam. So that is something very important. Not that it wasn't practiced, it was practiced, but it was not practiced as, we use the same word, and this is where people get confused. And this is where the right wing in particularly, you might have seen some tweets that, your prophet owned a slave. He did not own a slave in the concept of how the Americans, slave owners owned a slave. We are talking about a different concept at all. If you look at Usama bin Zaid, who was considered as a slave, he became a general. At the time of the death of Prophet ﷺ, he was appointed as a general and told to go towards Al-Sham. Yeah, so you can see.
Wasn't he the only Sahaba mentioned in the Holy Quran? Zayd.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And,
so the idea is different. So while we use the same word, we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that it's the same thing. But despite that, what we go back is the very first question you asked me about racism and inequality of human beings in Islam. Islam wants to create an equal platform as much as humanly possible. And therefore, everything that provides inequality has to be abolished, and we cannot see that to be practiced. And that is the simple teaching of Islam, that we try and bring about equality. And also something we have to mention this, and it's very painful to say, but we have to say it, that especially Asians, Muslims of Asian subcontinent, because our background comes from a hierarchical society, cultural society, we have imbibed racism amongst us. And we see Black African Muslims in Britain in particular, and I'm talking now focusing in this country, are being marginalized by us Indians. Yeah, and I'm pointing a finger to me here, right? And we need to learn, because we live in a Western society, we have been corrupted. We think of hierarchies in that sense, and we need to become very, very honest with ourselves and make sure that we take out this germ within our heads, in our minds and our hearts and our blood and our flesh of this hierarchy between different people. Just because they're of African origin, they're our Muslim brothers and sisters, and we need to treat them with equality. And if we don't, then it's wrong in the first place, but it will also be exploited by other groups of people. Yeah, and we need to win them over. There are new African Muslims, especially from Somalia, a new community. We have been here for longer. We should welcome them and become part and fabric of our community. Otherwise, if we create a division based on color, I think we will do the same thing and will be not in a position to speak with morality and the higher ground that we should be occupying. That brings me back to the question of racism that we all suffer. Maulana mentioned something very important, that even in Britain we suffer racism, but it seems to be different to the racism people suffer, say, in India or Middle East countries, right? And this is two things here, that sometimes you think, how can in Middle East can you suffer Islamophobia, or Muslims can suffer from a regime that's dominantly Muslim country? The suffering there is mainly physical. It's something that is tangible. People can feel it. People can see it. The racism and the hierarchy that has been created in the West is structural. It is invisible, but it puts people in its place. It is very difficult to decipher and to argue. So let me give you an example. There is no law in Britain that says that Muslims cannot talk about their faith regarding jihad, wearing of the veil, or any big aspect. But we as Muslims have become so self-centered, censored, self-policing because of a structure that has been created, imposed upon us, that we fear if we did that, we will become criminalized. So this system that operates very silently, and it operates that then creates a division within a system. So if you think about it, the fact in Britain, this is a statistical fact, that more white people per percentage take drugs than African Caribbean people. Yet more African Caribbean people are thought to be drug related because our mental mind is set up, because more African Caribbean people are arrested for that offense. So a system emerges where we start believing that. And this is what happens to Muslims as well, that we think we are better off, but our faith is being undermined. Our system, the way the Muslim agency is being taken away from us, I think is extremely dangerous. So what Maulana mentioned is, and the BBC, I think it was either the BBC or the Guardian did a survey. I think it was the BBC. I forget, you can check it up, where they applied for a job with the name Muhammad. And there are two CVs, one with the name Muhammad and one with an English name. And the name with Muhammad, identical CVs, did not get interviews. And the English name got interviews for a job. There's no law against it, but it's the system that creates that inequality. If this carries on, then our youth will become so resentful. We'll then go into a spiral of self-hate. That self-hate then manifests itself as violence. Then it becomes manifested violence against internally, then externally. And then when that happens, then they can point a finger and say, look at those guys, they're so violent. Yeah, like what's happening to the African Americans, to say, look, they're burning the buildings, they're doing this, they're doing acts. If they did it nicely, they would get their freedom. They don't deserve their freedom. So this is the system that creates it. And we have to be very, very alert and aware of how the political system and structure creates division within people, oppresses the people, and puts them in its place.
So I think, Dr. Saab, we started talking on the topic here, and I think it's really important to define what we're talking about. So we started talking about racism, and more specifically, when you mentioned there the CV of Muhammad, a gentleman called Muhammad, and the same one with non-Islamic one. So Islamophobia, can you just, I know this is something we mentioned in your introduction, you just done a PhD in this, so can we just define Islamophobia before we really get into the guts of it and start talking about it in detail?
I think the best way to understand Islamophobia is that it's a type of racism that targets an expression of Muslimness. Now, that Muslimness might sound strange. What's Muslimness? We are Muslim. And what's Muslimness? Muslimness is an idea of what the other people have of what a Muslim is. So, for example, having a beard is Muslimness. So if you ask an average white person, if you see a person with a beard, they'll think he's a Muslim, even if he's a Sikh person. That's why a lot of Sikhs and Punjabi people get attacked thinking they're Muslims. So that is Muslimness. It's a type of racism that targets an expression of Muslimness. That's how I would define it. Yeah, so it's very simple. It's a type of racism, targets expression of Muslimness. Now, the expression of Muslimness is very important because that changes. What is Muslimness and what the other people find offensive changes. So it could be physical stuff like wearing a burqa, having a beard, wearing a topi, having a khamis, or having a halal sign, or requesting circumcision, or using Allahu Akbar. That some people find it extremely offensive. Yeah. For others, it could be an ideology to say that we should not have interest in our businesses. That could become Muslimness. So you see, this idea changes different time and different places. And it goes back to the idea of racism, where one race thinks they're better than the other. So Muslims get attacked because of something, an aspect of theirs that becomes undesirable by the other people, and they use that to undermine them. And this is where Islamophobia comes in.
We've seen a rise in Islamophobia attacks throughout the UK, and I think sometimes we say we're fortunate here in Bradford. There's such a big Muslim population. We don't see these kind of acts, but they do exist, and where we hear the sisters' niqab has been pulled off, or the hijab being taken off, or discrimination in the classroom or the universities or whatever else. And so, can you tell us any more examples that you're
Sure.
aware of?
I think we shouldn't, first, I think we shouldn't think of Islamophobia simply as physical attack. I think if we do that, we will go down on a very steep slope towards disaster. Because yes, Islamophobia can manifest itself as a physical attack, but this is normally done by yobs. Yeah, they're done by people who have little brains. I'm sorry, excuse me for that, but because they're using physical action, and we shouldn't think of that. But I would say people in Bradford are suffering great Islamophobia, and I'll tell you why. Because despite having such a great Muslim community, your representation in political arena is not there. In public affairs, how many mayors, elected mayors, or chief commissioners, or advisors to the council are Muslims? So after so many years, such a great percentage population, why are you not part of the system? And that's not, we're giving Bradford as an example. It's happening in Leicester, where I am, and throughout the country. So we shouldn't simply think of Islamophobia as a physical attack. We should think of how Muslims are undermined at all different levels: physically, socially, culturally, psychologically, health-wise. Why are Muslims suffering more health problems in Bradford, I can tell you for sure, for diabetes and blood pressure than the average other community? Why is there not same level of education achievement by the brown Muslim community in Bradford as compared to the white community? These are the structural disparities. This is Islamophobia. So we should never become complacent. The fact that there hasn't been a physical attack. The whole system has to be looked at, and we need to understand that.
So how can we challenge this? How can we?
We have to first understand, obviously, this is what we're doing today, is we have to understand what it is. Then we have to become ourselves engaged into the system. We have to regain our agency, speak for ourselves. Until and unless we cannot start speaking for ourselves and we expect somebody else to speak for ourselves, in particular if that's somebody else who hasn't got 100% affiliation with you, he will only represent you. He cannot be you. You have to speak for yourself. We have to speak.
What we've seen is that people are sort of afraid to take that step because they think, if I go into the system, I'll become like them, or I'll be sold out, or you always hear these kind of.
Absolutely.
We have like 2 MPs here in Bradford, represent Bradford West and East, but like you said, it's the true representation. Are they really reflecting our needs, our thoughts? So how do we make somebody like that can be a truly representative?
That is, having an elected position is one way of doing it. But we need to be in position of authority and power, where decisions are made, where civil servants are, where decisions are made of how the hospitals are run, how our schools are run, what curriculum, what kind of syllabuses our children will be taught. They're the places we also need to be. So we need to be in every path and parcel of what a society requires. We cannot only be in one sector. Politics is only one sector of that, Maulana. And yes, some people might feel, and we may lose some people while they're trying to go there. But if enough people go in, we will inshallah consolidate each other, support each other morally, ethically, and hopefully we'll become a stronger nation, a society, and a people. And this is for benefit for the whole of British society, not just for Muslims. Where we try
I just want to give you an example. A few years ago here in Bradford, and I'm sure you'll be aware of this, they thought, like you're saying, in the education system, but again, mashallah, Muslim brothers and sisters, they had this big concern. So when they did get involved, I think we had the same case in Birmingham, they got labeled, and
Sure.
And I think then those same people, when you talk to now, they've just given up and they've lost hope, because they thought, whilst they've got in, and to make a change, not to alienate anybody, but just to benefit our community and help our society. But unfortunately, as they got in, they were alienated or they were pointed at, and because of that, people then thought, you know what, it's not worth it, and they've just lost hope.
this is very important point, Madhi. The Trojan affair in Birmingham, where the schools the leaders got censored, in particular headmasters. I know some of them. They turned around that school into making them one of the most highly successful school in the county, in Birmingham, right? They were so successful, and it is because of their success that they were targeted. In effect, that should tell us that if we move away from the arena, the people who will replace us are the ones who are going to oppress us. Yes, we will have to pay a price. No victory. Look at what's happening to the Black Lives Matter. This is where we have to learn from them. If we surrender now, we will end up for another 300 years down this path. Is that what we want? We need to make sure that we need to go there. And yes, there's going to be victims. Yes, somebody has to pay the price. But we as a society, and I mean a wider society, I'm not just talking about Muslims here as a society, will need to, whenever we find somebody in that position, we need to go out there and support them. So if we have a hand of support, then we'll have people come forward. So there's two things here. We have people who might want to do it or are scared to do it, but they're scared to do it for several reasons. One is because of the attack they're likely to get, but also the back of that is because they're hesitant, because they don't know whether if they get attacked to defend the society, will somebody be protecting them? Will they be supporting them? Will they be there for them if they get hammered? And this is something we as a nation, as a people of the British people overall need to understand, that if we want to create equality, those people who are sacrificing for creating that equality, we need to support them. And we need to do that. So I totally agree with you, Maulana, that yes, people are hesitant and reluctant to move forward, but we need to give them the support as much as we can, create avenues for them, make them move forward. And when they do get attacked, then we should go out there and support them. And think about the Trojan affair. Immediately after that, I know, and this is something very strange, but a play group created, there's a play going up and down the country called the Trojan Horse Affair of Birmingham. I think that's the title. And they're now highlighting how the Education Ministry at the time, the Secretary of State for Education, directly interfered within the local affairs and undermined the local headmaster and the governors of a school, how that school should be run. And that exposure, if we need to support this kind of initiatives so that next time when it happens, they're exposed and they feel vulnerable, those people who are trying to undermine the system. Yes, nothing comes easy. That's something we have to understand. We have to work towards it. And if we do that, then we'll hopefully try and create a better future for our children, whether they're Muslims or non-Muslims, as far as they're living in this country.
MashaAllah.
Baba, we should definitely go on to Ismail by mashallah, his passion, his.
I was just going to say we don't have that much time, and I really wanted to talk about Palestine.
We'll leave that one for the next time. I think we'll leave that one for the next time.
I just don't think we can do it justice in the amount of time we have left. So we'll have to invite Dr. Saab back to talk about that, inshallah. One thing that I wanted to mention there, and you mentioned it in your answer there, Dr. Saab, was that one way is to be elected, but there are other ways. What are some of the other ways we can get involved? And I can think of a few, like for example, becoming a governor of a school. But are there any other examples that we can actively be part of to start influencing our society from a point of power rather than a point of and I think that last time we had Mufti Amjad on, he says everybody wants their rights, nobody wants to take up their responsibility. So how can we get into a place where we have responsibility and therefore we can ask for our rights? What are some of the other positions that we're talking about here?
We're talking about almost every avenue of life, from even commerce, less business, rather than simply being a business person, a corner shop, a restaurant owner. We need to be within a system of the city where we become a group of people that then invest in the city to make sure that new people come back, and you become then an authority on how to create a business. Then you become respected, you become part of the society. This is how you do it, say, on one aspect. You mentioned about education. Education is just not becoming a teacher or a governor, but what is being taught in our schools? Who's making those decisions? and how do they get their positions. We need to get to those positions. Of course, there'll be a lot of doors slammed on our faces. It's going to be very difficult. But if we do not make the effort to push that door now, there's nobody behind us who's going to come and be able to sit on those chairs. So at the moment, we are so far backwards, unfortunately, we're simply pushing the doors. So this is what we need to do. Push the doors. We need to know all these institutes and organizations. If we look, Muslims are one of the biggest philanthropy group. We give out more charity than any people in Britain. That's a statistical fact. Yeah. Yet we are not being rewarded or acknowledged for it. Not rewarded in the sense of somebody clapping their hands for us, but at least being acknowledged for it. Yeah. So that means journalism, media. Who's writing the stories about Muslims? Why are non-Muslims writing about us? There's 3 million of Muslims in here. We need to be able to either be part of the system or create such powerful media outlets where we be able to have our own views and expressions being put forward, and those should be so powerful and legitimate enough that they have on par reflection with any media that exists in this country.
It's my bad. Do you see that change is coming about? We've seen that mashallah now, especially from our last generation to this generation, especially in the Pakistani community, we've seen that people have accepted that this is my country now. This is where I'm going to live. This is where I'm going to die. Before, there was always 1 foot in England, 1 foot in Pakistan. You know, you take your body back home, everything. But now I think children are saying to your father and their mother, Mom, I'm getting married here. I'm settling here, and I'm going to live my life here. And when I die here. So, and I think because of that, people are going into positions, people are going to universities, people are getting that education, and people are pushing themselves. And I think, you know, in journalism, there are a lot of Muslims are at the forefront at the moment, even on the BBC and whatever, and like that in the MPs and councillors, whether they're people of substance or not, but they're apparent now. The Lord Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. So I'm just saying, what sometimes we've achieved here, people in other nations they see and say, "Wow, you guys are really involved in your in your community." And I remember Hazrat Maulana Ismail used to, even the ulama, he used to would really emphasize that as well as being alim, you are part of society, and you need to go into the different fields and engage and be pioneers as well. So you change that thought process, and you build with inside people that whilst you're living in dunya, your maqsad is akhirat, and that was a whole mentality change. And I remember Hazrat got slaughtered for sending ulama to universities, and ours was the first group of people. But the thing is, alhamdulillah, now over the years we've seen the benefits of ulama going to university and progressing in journalism, in lawyers, in doctors. Now I've got classmates that are serving at the front line at the moment, and they're hafiz, they're qari, and they're alims, and same time they're doctors, and they're saving lives at the forefront. So
you touch, sorry, we've only got a few minutes. You touch on something very important, Maulana. The first thing is two things very important. I think maybe we can conclude on this, is the fact that we should not first, this is almost when we mentioned about Islamophobia in Muslim majority countries, simply somebody's name is a Muslim, we should not be assured that we will have redress from that individual. That individual has to prove his worth, and that he has to prove his worth, and we have to support that individual. That's the first thing. So sometimes we will be able to see that people of no faith or other faith might be much more closer to our way of thinking, and we need to win them over as well. So that's the first thing. But you touched on something very important, that now we culturally and socially think we're part and parcel of Britain. So if we are part of this country, then we should do everything possible to make sure that Muslims, that Muslimness that they have a problem with, first disappears. It shouldn't be a problem. And we should be accepted for what we are, to be part of Britain. What I'm saying is, when people say British, when they use the word British, they should be in the corner within their thinking that there's Muslims there. At the moment when you say British, you think white. You don't think Muslim, you don't think black, you don't think brown, you don't think Chinese, you only think white. That is what needs to change. British does not mean white. We are British. white people are British, black people are British. That is British. There's a saying, why isn't there a black in the Union Jack? Yeah. So why isn't there a Muslim in the Union Jack? We need to think that. When we start thinking like that and we support each other, we work towards that, and we make this country great and equal for everybody, I think we have a great future. But we need to take that first step, and we need to work hard, inshallah.
MashaAllah, and I think there were some amazing concluding statements there. So just to finish off and thank the panel. So Dr. Saab, it's been absolutely amazing having you on. Some absolutely amazing pearls of wisdom there. Unfortunately, we didn't get across to the topic of pastime, but 100%, I think it's worth a whole podcast on its own. And inshallah, Mona Saab can arrange, and inshallah, we can get some of your very valuable time in the future to talk about such a topic which is close to our heart. Mona Saab, thank you for obviously taking your time out and pioneering these sort of sessions. Without somebody having the fikr that Mona Saab has, we would truly almost be alone in this without our community driving and without stuff. And some other little announcements, inshallah. So Masjid Umar is still building the new masjid. So if you could donate and anything you have, I know it's a very difficult time at the moment with people constrained with being off work and stuff like that. But these are the times that are testing. So inshallah, any donation would be really appreciated. We have the links across the bottom of the screen. You can see there. There are many ways that you can donate. We tried making it as easy as possible to donate. So if you could donate, that'd be really appreciated. Every Sunday we have a podcast. So some are pre-recorded, some are live. So inshallah, every Sunday 7 o'clock there'll be some content to consume. So look out for that. Like, subscribe, and any topics that you think you want, put a comment on there. We read all the comments, and we take them on board. So please do take your time out to comment and give us some feedback on them. Mullah Saab, do you want to mention about Madrasa quickly and the Madrasa opening?
Yeah, mashallah, we've got a question whether the mosque be open. Yeah, we had a meeting yesterday, and I think there's a big confusion at the moment. A lot of people are anticipating that mosque will open tomorrow. I think this is a confusion open down the country because they did announce the individual prayers. Now, the biggest concern for the mosque is a lot of when we come for prayer, we end up doing it in Jamaat, in congregation, and that's not allowed at the moment. So because of that, I think the mosques are just taking the precaution steps of just, for now, just the key workers, the imams, and whoever else are just leading the individual prayers of the mosque. They will continue, but otherwise there's no congregation prayers until government announces something. And I think they're expecting something on the 4th of July. But again, Allah knows best. But for the particular, at the moment, mosque will not open tomorrow on the 15th of June. Inshallah, hopefully as things are opening up and lockdown is being raised, hopefully slowly things will get back to normal, but these things will take time. And mashallah, I know a lot of our Muslim community up and down the country, they've been disciplined, and they've stayed at home, they prayed at home. It's been very difficult. People are dying to come back to the masjid, but just exercise patience for a little longer. Inshallah, hopefully because of that, we've seen that we managed to suppress the virus going around, and so hopefully we just need to be a little bit more patient. But in the meantime, inshallah, tomorrow, especially in our own madrasa, Masjid Umar, the Paradise Academy, we are going to go online, and we are teaching via Zoom. So for the foreseeable future, so whoever are the students of the madrasa, they should all have been given their login details and anything. And if you haven't, we've communicated how to communicate with us. And mashallah, Baba's wrote Allah reward you for your efforts, Baba. Behind the scenes, you've been doing a lot of work with Zoom and getting this program ready. So hopefully, inshallah, we'll kick off tomorrow with our madrasa online via Zoom. So Ismail, I think this is the future where
Yes,
Allah make it
the
easy.
digital world.
So, and I want to say Jazakallah to Ismail for taking out his time. Ismail is a very busy person. May Allah Ta'ala give him the ability and the strength to continue doing all the good effort that he is doing. And like I remember our Ustad Mufti Shabir Sahib used to say, he's doing Farz Kifaya for the Ummah, especially regarding Palestine and Masjid Al-Aqsa, especially here in the UK. And much as he's taking up this particular concern. And I know a lot of people are looking forward to the podcast because of Masjid Al-Aqsa, Palestine. But inshallah, we will arrange another time with Ismail. I think we'll just need an hour. And I think whenever Aqsa, then everybody just gets passionate and they love the stories. Ismail Bhai, last year we took a group from Masjid Ummah, 14 of us from the mosque, and they really enjoyed a beautiful time. And I think, we can just go on. I remember we did the Kal Ghazali back in the masjid, and the people just looked at the Muslim, when we're going to go again, let's go every year. And so, inshallah, may dua, let Allah open the doors of the Haram, Makkah, Medina to everybody once more, and the Masjid Aqsa, and all the masajid throughout the world. And Allah to open these doors of mercy once more. We can occupy these masjids, and we can go to Masjid Aqsa and pray once more, inshallah. And hopefully, Ismail, we will call him again for another time, inshallah. Jazakallah, Ismail Bhai, for coming in. Any last words, Ismail Bhai?
Jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah. Allah forgive us if we've made any mistake, and inshallah, let's united we go forward. Jazakallah khair.
Ameen.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.